Apple is my top prediction, top performer for FAANG stocks in 2019. Obviously not how I envision this year starting. And so there's a lot of searching that I need to do after the results came out last night. I'm sticking behind that prediction that Apple will, in fact, outperform FAANG in 2019. And the reason is I think that investor psychology around this story historically has been a pendulum. And I believe we can kind of walk through the individual. I think you've illustrated them well on your show this morning, what the issues are. But I'm putting some faith in Tim Cook's comment that he's going to do everything in his power to try to reverse this, not only fundamentally, but I think in terms of improving the stock performance. There's some levers that they can do, which we can talk about. But the key is this is not caused by any sort of competition or a shift of consumers away from technology. This is caused by some issues around economics and some mistakes the companies made around aggressively pricing their phones. They jumped the price by 23% this fall of iPhones. And so to me, these are not structural problems. And as long as those themes remain intact, which is Apple's ability to bring all these devices together in a world where we're going to have more consumer devices, electronics, I think that this story will, in fact, reverse to the positive in the coming year.
Hey, Gene, let me just ask you on that point. The idea that he's going to do everything in his power to turn this around, a lot of this is outside his control. I mean, if you're talking about a company that now has about a quarter of its earnings coming from China, and that country is in an economic slowdown, good luck.
Yeah, let me just quick, Becky, there's another important point that I failed to mention before that plays into this about doing everything in his power. There's a gap between perception and reality that's happening this morning. The perception is that Apple dropped a bombshell and the company is moving in a negative direction. The reality is they're going to have a record earnings quarter. Now, right, sure. I understand that investors value this.
I understand that entirely. I understand that entirely, but I think it's China.
Let me just quickly answer your question, though. Yeah, the question is, what can he do? And there are things he can do around more aggressively going after product categories. I've got a history of being incorrect around some of those, so I'm going to stay away from that. They could do M&A. They could do analyst days where they could kind of inform investors more holistically about how their business works. They could more aggressively buy stock back. All those things are within Cook's control.
And Gene, Gene, the valuation right now, what is it implying about the business and how it declines?
So it's essentially it's going to be trading at around 10, 11 times earnings. If you subscribe to the post-cash, it's around 6 times. But what it implies essentially is that the street numbers are going to go down by probably around 6% once all these numbers shake out here.
Gotcha.
Ed, what do you think?
I think, well, it's fair to say I agree with what Gene's saying here. I do think, however, that there are some structural issues with regards to what I'm trying to sort of figure out is how much of it is China economics in terms of just fewer people buying phones or upgrading phones versus companies like Huawei sort of eating share, right? Huawei actually jumped the most in the third quarter, at least in the latest figures we could see in terms of their smartphone sales around the world. Apple was kind of flattish. And so that was a sign that, hey, Huawei, which is a huge, huge company in China, it's like their version of Samsung. The Chinese government is really doing its best to kind of make that its big tech player. And I think that's a big factor in terms of how people have switched or remain less loyal to Apple. And I think that's a big problem.
What about Gene's point, though, that maybe they were too aggressive with the with their price increases for the phones? If they bring that down,
so you get into this, you get into this ASP metric, right, which is something that we've all been looking at. Of course, they sort of follow along with that. And I think that's certainly a factor. There is another factor, which is in China in particular. The way people use their phones is different than anywhere else, and that's largely because they only use like 2 or 3 apps. The main app that they use is WeChat. WeChat is like Amazon and Twitter and Facebook and Google all in one, and when that becomes the main focus of what you do on the phone itself becomes less important, right? So I think that's another factor that's weighing on this, and it's just something that Apple hasn't solved. It hasn't created its own sort of software moat in terms of why people will stick to it. I think in the U.S. and elsewhere, photos are a big part of why people hold onto their phones.